Alright, so we have reached Cloak and Dagger Season 2. I was looking forward to this season, as I mentioned in my first review. I am excited for Season 2. I can't wait to see what they're gonna do for Season 2. Well, yeah, not so excited about this season much anymore at all. The reason for that is because this season really let me down because it had a lot of shit going on in it, and I've got like pages of notes here that are here to help me explain to you why this season let me down and why I didn't even like it as much as the first season. And starting off this review with the first thing is that, as I said in my review for the first season, both of them at times, it was only very rarely, but there were times in the show where their performance just felt a little wooden. And in this season, I think their performances managed to be a lot worse than last season. They were even more wooden, even more unconvincing, I guess you could say. I mean, when it comes to the more humorous and light-hearted stuff throughout Season 2, that I actually liked. I liked the bond that these two have, but when it comes to the really dramatic and serious stuff, they just don't pull it off. I don't know, they're just way too wooden. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention in my review for the first season is that the mysticism and voodoo aspect of the show wasn't really cutting it for me last season. I've grown to become a bit more used to it. I'm more used to it by Season 2, but another problem has occurred, right? That being that the rules that they set out for this magic and voodoo stuff isn't really explained too well. Like, there are times where they explain things and they set up the rules, right? And that I understand, but there are times where something happens where they didn't explain it, and when something else happens, they don't explain it afterward. And I'm just sitting there like, what does that, how and why? Like, I'll give you an example. When two certain characters go into Ty's pocket dimension, because Marvel fans would know he has his own pocket dimension, and when we get to see his pocket dimension, we see this record shop when they're in his pocket dimension, and we learn later in this season that this record shop is someone else's sort of like pocket dimension or someone else's ability or power, right? I don't know how that can work if it's Ty's pocket dimension. How can someone else's abilities be within his pocket dimension? I don't fully understand that. And that's just one example as to some of the weird stuff that happens in this season that never really gets explained. I will say though, one thing that I did like about the season, around episode 3 is when Detective O'Reilly turns evil. That interested me because it is something that they sort of hinted at the end of last season when she's crawling out of the water and she stands up and her eyes are all weird. Like, that was interesting. See how they did it, right? For this season, I thought it was really interesting. I liked it because it was kind of like a moral dilemma, if you know what I mean. Like, the good side of a person in confliction with the bad side of a person and how that will affect Ty and Tandy and the shit they're going through. That I actually kind of liked. It was cool. And another thing that I really liked is the return of Connors this season, who was the guy who killed Ty's brother in the first season, right? And I think Ty sucked him into his pocket dimension, right? And that's where Connors was for the majority of his disappearance or whatever. I just used disappearance in completely the wrong way, but when he was missing, that's where he was, right? And I liked what they did with him once he got out into the real world, escaping Ty's pocket dimension. He's so sorry, and he kind of like went through his own little hell, and now he's like had an epiphany and wants to take down his uncle. And you'd think by him having this epiphany and changing his whole life up, that his uncle, who is like in charge, like he's a senator or whatever, Connors, right? His uncle got him out of that sticky situation when Connors killed Ty's brother, right? So you'd think that Connors' uncle would be the huge villain for this season. Nope. What ends up happening is someone else with some power who can access a record shop and play like these little vinyl records to suck people's hope away becomes the main villain of the season. Why? This is where the season for me starts, where everything starts to go like nuts, like not in a good way. Like when the season started out with episode 1 and 2, it was a bit boring. It took a while to get going. And then when, Detective Riley turns to the dark side, right, and becomes a villain, essentially, that I thought was interesting. When they brought back Connors, I thought that was interesting. All because these were unresolved issues from last season that they kind of teased at the end of that last season, right? So you'd think they would focus more on that, more on Connors and you know, stretch that out and explore that storyline, and also explore the storyline with evil Detective O'Reilly. But no, all of that gets pushed aside for this villain who can sap people's energy, essentially. Admittedly, this villain could have worked and did work. Like, I was interested in this villain. It's just I wanted to see the other two things, right? I wanted to see where they would go, where those stories would go. As it is, though, those stories either get completely abandoned or completely resolved way too quickly. So that is my biggest problem with this season, is that they have too many plots and subplots going on in this season. It's like a 10 episode season, and they have like three major plot lines going on. And I'm just gonna come out and say this now. This show is not turning out to be a good show. Like, this season, as I said, really disappointed me. I was bored for most of it and confused for a lot, and that confusion sometimes is intentional. They intend to confuse you, because there's a lot of times in season 1 and season 2 where some really mind-bending shit happens, and when that mind-bending shit happens, they don't really pay attention, right? That also leaves a lot of plot holes. As I said, with the voodoo stuff, they're not... In all honesty, the writing for this season fucks this show into the ground. I don't think this show has a bright future ahead of it. Runaways does. I still think that's a good show, but this show I think is gonna die off pretty quickly. If they even get a third season, I don't think they will, but if they do, I will review it. But if they don't up their game by the third season, then I'm just not gonna watch it. Like if they do make a third season and it's not good, I will just choose not to watch the rest. Anyway, I will see you in my review for Jessica Jones Season 3. Can't wait to watch and review that one.